Greetings YouTube and welcome to the Blue Corner. In this video we're going to be talking some Narukami because there's no tournament results for this week for me to go over, and just about everything in this clan for both the trial deck and the core set has been revealed. All we're missing is... God, what are we missing? We're missing a common, which I'm pretty certain is going to be a grade 1, and then one double rare, which we all know it's going to be Vanguard Gold, the perfect guard draw. So, that being said, I have a fairly good idea of what this deck is trying to do, and I also have at least a good idea of where it's going to ultimately fall in the scape of the format. And it pains me to say this, but I feel like this deck is just going to be really middle of the road. It's not awful, but I also feel like it's going to fall short of being able to consistently appear at the top tables, at least in singles. In teams, Narus will probably appear pretty frequently because you only have, what, a 66% chance of going up against your bad matchups like Neo Nectar. No, wait, you have a 66% chance to avoid a deck like Neo Nectar, I think, especially if you put Narus in the third player slot, because most people will put Neos in the first or second slot in order to compete with the other decks. And that's assuming, of course, Neo is still the deck to beat in the format. Early reveals show that Nubatama might actually have that deck's number, so who knows? I guess it comes down to how our Nubatama matchup is. I also think the Royal Paladin matchup looks really iffy, especially if they're still going to be playing cards from the original build. Like, if your opponent is able to open up with multiple Akanes, then you're going to have a difficult time, because that's a lot of field to go through, and it makes your VR a more of a viability than an asset. And we'll get to him in a moment. I do believe our Oracle Think Tank matchup should be favorable, although it's much closer than I would like it to be, and I don't know how the Murakumo matchup goes. We have a grade 3 you would not want to get Zombaku'd on, but we also have two other grade 3s that are not the worst. Shadow Paladin, one card makes that matchup a lot easier to deal with, and Angel Feather, I also have no idea how that goes because I haven't had a chance to play against that. I've been playing both against some people. I've also done a little bit of goldfishing and a little bit of shadowboxing. For shadowboxing, I went up against OTT, Genesis, Neo Nectar, and then against other people, I went up against decks like Grand Blue Kagero, Mega Colony. Mega Colony was... that matchup is a lot harder than I thought was going to be. Like, Stag Beetle, if it does that repeatedly, really messes with you, and it's making, like, it... From just how my play sessions have gone, I'm not so sure if I want to really be on the high crit train anymore. Like, I was playing 6 crit, 6 draw, then 7 crit, 5 draw. I'm probably going to go back to 6 draw. But I don't know if I want to play the 6 crits or if I want to go with fronts. Because a defensive trigger, one defensive trigger is not enough to completely stop your turn, but if your opponent hits multiples, and if you're me, your opponent's always going to hit multiple triggers, your turn just ends. And I feel like fronts would be better for making our multiple front row attackers just get bigger. That's going to be something I'll have to see though. So crits do work, especially with our VR, but there might be a place for fronts too, or maybe I'll just go 2 crits and then the rest fronts, like something like that. In any case, those are just some initial thoughts on how the deck plays. As for what my opinions are on the cards in the deck, well, let's get into this. First things first, we've got the Naoki trial deck. All these things that we're not going to get over in North America, at least not without the help of ordering from someone like the Magic Satchel. There you go, there's your one shout out. And we do get this Axel marker, though, which has a chance of being foil, I believe. By the way, they've changed how the foiling is done in this deck. So you get your grade 3, grade 2, grade 1 guaranteed triple rare foiling. So Great Composure Dragon, Recklessness, and Lizard Soldier Ricky. And then there's one of 6 random variant cards that are also going to get the foil. And they can be either Excess Streak Dragon, the Perfect Guard, each and every one of the triggers, Photon Bomber Wyvern. The triggers are the most expensive of the bunch, with especially the heal, because obviously that's going to be the card you play more as opposed to all the other ones. Like, our heal from this draw deck is, I think, pushing $20 to $30. I know the OTT one is even more expensive because, well, OTT is OTT, but Lord, they've made these trial decks more money now, especially if you're able to pull the foil trigger. Then what is it? These things are what, $15 in America, and the triggers are averaging $20 or more. You make bank if you hit at one, especially if you hit the heal. Then you get double your money. But that's all for that. Now for the actual things in the trial deck. The boss monster for the trial deck is Great Composure Dragon, who at the beginning of each player's battle phase gains 3,000 power for each empty rearguard circle in the opponent's front row. But if it's during your battle phase, it's 5,000 instead. Great Composure is, for all intents and purposes, just a giant beat stick. You're not going to get the defensive 3k power very often, if at all. Like it's highly unrealistic to expect that to go off, especially when your opponent just has to throw things down to do that. But on the other hand, though, if they do go out of their way to turn this guy's power gain off, then they're committing more cards out of hand, pardon my words here, and that makes it easier for you to pick them off to do your things. What I see this guy being is just as a 17 or 22 attacker in the front row, or 27 or 32 on Axel. We did not get a Battledore clone out of the set, and Vermilion is ass, so this is probably going to be our 1 to 2 of grade 3 we play in the deck alongside your 2 Datonics brothers. Yeah, Poster Dragon's pretty okay. Talked about Duress Clap Dragon, it's meh. Thunderstorm Dragoon was good at first, but I'm probably not going to play it now. Reckless Dragon is the other foil in the trial deck, and honestly I feel this is the best card in the trial deck. So, on Vanguard or Rearguard placement, you can counterblast 1 and bind your opponent's front row rearguard. Also, when it attacks a Vanguard, if your opponent has 1 or less rearguards in the front row, it gets power plus 3,000. Why was this not what Martial Arts Dragon was when we had set 9? Like, look at this guy. Look what he does. Look how he plays. It is Martial Arts Dragon, but with a better cost and no friggin' Gen Break or Thunderstrike requirements. It's just 1 or less units in the front row on Vanguard attack 3,000. God! Oh man, like, that's how triggered I still am over how awful Martial Arts Dragon was. You played that card back in the day because you had no other alternatives. This is a much better alternative. This will definitely see play in the deck, both in standard and in premium formats, I feel. The premium deck, at least at the beginning, I think, is just going to be standard plus, with the exception of Great Composure Dragon. He's probably not going to see play. I think we'll see Dragonic Descendant Sigma in the spot instead, but I'm pretty certain Drill and Stinger will get played over the Vanquisher units. And now, like, a lot of cards coming out of this set are going to be played in the premium deck because these are Narukami units that do things in the early game, which is something unheard of before. Excess Streak Dragon, you're not going to play. Red River Dragoon is a 9k grade 1 vanilla with no shield, like I said it was going to be. People doubted me on this one, but I knew it was going to be the case. Photon Bomber Wyvern is not good. Counterblast 2 to get 5,000 power, but if your opponent has 1 or less rearguards on the front row, it gets 10,000 power instead. Yes, it's multi-trigger, so you could, in theory, buff him up by an even bigger amount, but Counterblast 2 is really expensive for just about any deck out there, especially for an effect like this. There's already another card in this clan that's Counterblast 2 that's probably not going to see play, and it does more. There's a Soldier Ricky is useful for being able to swap units in the front and back around. If your opponent has nothing in the front because they don't want to play into your front row binds, but they have things in the back in order to play around your VR, you can use this to pull those up. You can also use this to push interceptors out of the way so that your opponent has less options to guard with, and you can pull up annoying grade 1s in the back like Commando Laurel, but that's implying Dimension Police is still even played at this point. He also gets plus 3,000 power for his trouble, so in an emergency, you can use him as an 11k attacker booster. However, he does cost Soul, and Soul is a very precious resource in this clan. Like, I was going on about how we were counterblasting 2 for Bomber Wyvern, and there's another card that counterblasts 2, but this deck, I feel, uses up more Soul than it does counterblast, and we don't really have a way to build up Soul, so you gotta be careful with this guy. I'm also not certain if I really would play 4 of it anymore. There's all other cards that I feel are worth playing as well. I might play this at 3 or 2. Depends on what that last common does. Here's your perfect guard that you're not going to play, and here's our starter. And then, gross. Okay, so you can make them joke about how, like, this is pretty much a cringier version of Adelaide, the Spike Brothers heal, but that's a meme. This is just a furry. And I am not about that. So If I play crits in my deck, this is going to be the one I play 1 or 2 of at the most, and I'm just going to play Malevolent Djinn as a 4. I know I probably triggered some people by saying that because it's 2018, but I'm sorry. This artwork is just creepy. And then we got Zypherkate Hayate, Old Dragon Mage, and surprisingly enough, the heal trigger is Worm Toxic Eradicator Zyobo, not Demonic Dragon Nymph Zyobo. So, yeah. Could this be a hint of what happens for Narukami's Wave 2? Are we going to get Eradicators? If so, it would probably be Gauntlet Buster Dragon and Dragonic Ascendant once again. Interesting that they would go this route. And yeah, this is going to be the most expensive card in the trial deck if you can get its foil version. Man, I just cannot believe that they made our heal trigger an Eradicator. They gave us an Eradicator this early, but there were Battle Sisters and Witches for Oracle Think Tank Wave 1, and look where we're at now. They've got Witches in Wave 2 and Magus in Grade 2. So, yeah, that's the trial deck content. I thought this was going to be better than it ultimately was. It's not an awful trial deck. It's probably better than the Aquaforce one. Composure Dragon, admittedly, doesn't really do much other than get really big, but he's got rearguard utility, which will ultimately can make the trial deck worth picking up at least one of, if only so you can get a couple copies of this. And this is the main reason why you're going to want to pick this up. Spot removal that doesn't cost soul, it's just only Odd Counterblast, works on Vanguard and Rearguard. He's also a 12k attacker on Rearguard. Granted, he can't hit Force Vanguards by himself. You'll need to put a booster behind him for that, but you can always make him 22 on Axel. But it's a Sky Hollow Dragon that works in the front row, that works on Vanguard, and also binds. So it has applications for setting up Conquest Dragon and Premium, and it just adds to your binds. So, like, yeah, this card's fantastic, and Ricky will see some amount to play. Then moving on to the core set, we've got our VR for the deck, Detonix Drill Dragon, who I have very mixed feelings on. Like, there are going to be the games where I play with this and I go, this card is really cool. And then I have other games where I play with this card and I'm like, man, this card's really not that great. And it's because of how his other skill is worded. So, first things first, when he attacks the Vanguard, you can +1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards in the front row and bind it. Also, you can discard cards from your hand equal to the number of cards rearguards your opponent currently controls in order to have them get the ability to restand after the battle at plus 5,000 power, but -1 drive. So, yeah, this guy is, for all intents and purposes, a Ziegenberg. Now, unfortunately, because this is an Axel Grade 3, the 12k power and the fact it doesn't gain any real power until after the first battle means it's a lot easier for your opponent to guard this than, say, Dragonic Overlord or Exculpate the Blaster, because they can, if you swing at this without a booster because you weren't able to get a hold of one or something like that, then your opponent can just simply throw a crit trigger down and immediately 2 past you, or, God help you, you're up against a force and they just throw a heal down, you can't hit through that. And then on the restand, you're swinging for 17, so again, your opponent playing a force deck could just throw a crit down and you can't hit through that. And you're banking on a 1 pass to break through Protect, but Protect can just still throw a heal down, and you get stopped. I really do wish this guy got more power than just a +5. If it was +10, or even just +6 to get to a higher magic number, 18, 23, 28, and such forth. Also, there is the whole issue of his discard cost. I do not like the fact that it is on attack, as opposed to after the battle, like with the other restanders. Which means if you do not have a hand at all, or your hand is really low because you had to try and live through something like a Ravenhair Ezel turn, then you might not even be able to pay for this guy's restand cost. I really would have liked it if it was after battle discard restand, because at least you could try and fish for triggers, such as draws to build up the hand necessary in order to discard a restand. And this is where I feel that the card is going to make you go, this card's awesome, and this card's awful, because when you're up against a deck like, say, Oracle Think Tank, or something that just cannot put out much of a board because it prefers to keep its cards in hand, then yes, this card is great because you're not discarding very many, maybe 1 or 2 cards depending on your opponent's board setup. But if your opponent has 3 or more rear guards, or they're playing a deck that can just keep shitting on a board, looking specifically at you, Neo Nectar, then you're losing like 3 or 4 cards each turn for this guy's restand, and then you're not actually going plus, you're washing or even just going neg for the restand. And for a clan that generally does not build up hand, that's pretty dire. But this will see play. It's not an awful card. It's okay. It has applications. Going first, this card is actually quite good, especially, again, if your opponent doesn't commit much to the board because they don't want to lose their shit to your binds, then, yeah, a restanding Vanguard versus your opponent's grade 2 is quite something. Also, it actually is useful for the premium deck in that if you have to go first and you don't know if you can fight for first stride that well, you can just ride this guy and restand and get your 3 checks that way. And then if you go second, you can just do your stride stuff. And the other thing to note that has some implications with another card in the set is that he is battle phase binding, which will trigger 1 or 2 cards that you currently have in here. One of which enables for extra attacks. So there is that too. I'd say compared to the other VRs of the set, I would put this on par with Pentagonal Magus in that really you're either going to wash, you're going to either break even in terms of like overall like card economy in your hand, or you'll go neg at the worst. And admittedly, Pentagonal Magus allows you to get deeper into your deck and makes your triggers bigger. This one is just a restander, and restanding is generally pretty good in Vanguard. So, yeah, his SVR should look pretty dope, though. Purple background usually comes out to be pretty nice as an SVR. Then, moving on to our backup grade 3 Datonic Stinger Dragon. So, Vanguard Rearguard, when it's put in place, you can count up as 1 to choose one of your opponent's rearguards in the front row, bind it, and it gets power plus 5,000. Also, when you ride upon it, you can call this out to a rearguard circle, and then your Vanguard gets power plus 10,000 until the end of the turn. This card is fantastic. I feel like, compared to Datonic's Drill Dragon, this is the card that you definitely do care about seeing, because you can ride it, kill something, or if you can't kill something, you can just set up for the next turn in which you ride something else on top of it, call this guy out, kill something, he's now 27 on Axel because you make an Axel circle, then you call this guy out, and your Vanguard's 22 or greater. Obviously, this is intended to combo with Drill Dragon. It'll be a 22 first swing, 27 second swing. That's actually pretty okay. And if you're already on Drill Dragon, you can just call this guy out and snipe something in the front row. It is, for all intents and purposes, a Recklessness Dragon. There you go. And if you're in a matchup where you're not gonna be able to like immediately go for like the big kill turn and you have to just grind them out, I guess, you can just ride this over it itself repeatedly, and you'll always be able to, like, for Counterblast 2, you get to ping 2 rear guards, and this will be a 27, and your other one will be a 27, and you can just keep chaining Stinger Dragons, and keep just picking away at the front row, and eventually go for your big Drill Dragon push. So I do feel like Stinger Dragon is really good. People are undervaluing. People are sleeping on this compared to some of the other cards, and if this was made to be our Origin Rare, I would not be upset. I'm pretty certain I know what the Origin Rare is, though, but seriously, this thing is good. Then, our other triple rare is Dragonic Death Scythe, which I'm pretty certain will be the OR for the set. His skill is Rearguard. When put in play, you can Soul Blast 2, choose opponent's front row on the Rearguard, bind it, and gets power plus 3,000. Also, Rearguard Circle. During the battle in which it attacks the Vanguard, and there are no opponent's Rearguards in the front row in the same column as him, then he gets power plus 5,000. So he's a 14 attacker if there's nothing in front of him, and if you use the first skill as well, he's going to be 17. If he's on an Axel circle, then he'll be 24 or 27. Soul Blast 2 is incredibly hefty, especially given that there are quite a few cards in his deck that already eat up soul. If you're chaining Stinger Dragons together, you're not going to have enough soul to use Scythe more than once in a game. And if you factor in Ricky as well, that's even less soul to work with. But he is a 14 or 24 beater, so if Scythe sees play, and I think it'll be more for the beat stick aspect than the removal. It is nice, though, that you do get the option to at least kill something without using Counterblast, but again, I feel like Soul is a very precious commodity in this, and we don't have very many ways to build him back up. You're definitely not going to be able to use Scythe more than once in a game, I feel, especially in tandem with the other cards. Then our first double rare is Dragonic Kaiser Vermilion, who you guys know is my favorite card in this game, and it's not very good. So, rip. I had a feeling it was going to be as such, especially when I figured it was going to be a double rare. So, what does Vermilion do, and why am I disappointed with it? Well, His skill is Counterblast 2. During its turn, this unit gets +5 and a crit. However, if your opponent has 2 or more rearguards in the front row, it gets to battle your opponent's front row units instead of getting the crit. Yeah. The reason why I'm disappointed with this guy is, 1, Counterblast 2 is incredibly pricey. True, you're killing 2 things in that regard, but if you're not killing 2 things, you're counterblasting 2 to get 5 and a crit. For God's sakes, Musashi gets that for just having 3 or more of your rearguards in play, and it works on Vanguard rearguard. Now, admittedly speaking, if Vermilion worked on Vanguard rearguard as is, he would be incredibly stupid. But if he worked, for instance, he got 5 and a crit for your opponent having no rearguards in front row, and he worked on rearguard, I actually wouldn't mind this guy. But that Counterblast 2 is just a huge turnoff, especially when you don't have very many ways of making back the Counterblast. If you're doing 1 Counterblast in a turn, or 2 Counterblasts in a turn, not 3 like you would be using with this guy and another card, then I guess I wouldn't mind so much. But like, the deck, he also just does not synergize that well with the deck. That's the other thing. Like, he doesn't bind the units he attacks, so he doesn't work with the bind-oriented cards that are in here, especially the ones we're going to see later on into the video. And yeah, it's not really that great. I mean, it has applications against Axel decks, I'm sure. I'm okay, but other than Gold Paladin, I don't know what's going to be seeing a lot of play by the time the Vermilion gets out, because Murakumo's dropping off in play. It still tops over in Japan, but not as much as before, I believe. But maybe there might be a place for Vermilion in the future, but right now I am not seeing it, and I feel like Great Composure Dragon just works better because it does something on rearguard and in addition to Vanguard. Yeah, my disappointment is quite full, and especially since that Vermilion's art looks really good. Like, I've always believed that Vermilion has one of the best designs of both Narukami and Vanguard as a whole, and this artwork is dope. Like, I'm glad he's not the triple rare, because it would have been a real waste to get this guy an origin rare when this artwork is actually better than the original, which is more than I can say for Death Scythe here. But TLDR, Vermilion's expensive. He costs 2 Counterblasts. If it was Counterblast and Soul Blast, I'd be more inclined to not give him as much shit, but 2 CB for just 5 and a crit if your opponent has no front row is really eh. I feel like you could have just simply have him get the Counterblast 2 to get the front row sweep and just give him 5 and a crit for free if your opponent has no front row. Because, I don't know, just Counterblast 2 for 5 and a crit is so bad. Now that we got that out of the way, let's move on to some actual good cards. Rising Phoenix is absurd and arguably the best double rare in this set. Why? Because as long as he is in the drop zone during your turn, when your opponent's rearguard gets bound, you can call him from there to the rearguard circle, and he gets +3. Yes, this is a reoccurring 11k booster, attacker, and yeah, all you have to do is just get into the drop zone, which can be done through guarding, soul blasting, healing it off. It is a Grand Blue card in a removal clan that also has the ability to multi-attack thanks to this in combo with Datonic Steel Dragon, because he is one of 2 cards revealed so far that can bind in battle phase. Now, unfortunately, in the premium deck, this does not work with cards like Voltatorn Dragon because they are retire, then bind, but that is a small... Okay, that's a pretty hefty price to pay for that deck, but as far as this guy goes in Standard, it is fantastic. It is a card you can just simply call to the field, and it's a booster, an attacker, and you don't care if your opponent kills it because it's just going to come right back. Like, the only way that your opponent can actually get rid of Rising Phoenix for the rest of the game is to either tuck it with Gear Chronicle or to bind it in the mirror. And if I'm playing against the mirror match, I'm not calling this guy to the front row. And yeah, like, Phoenix is really good, and I think how well this deck will win in some matchups like Neo Nectar or anything that can fill the board is going to come down to how frequently you can chain Phoenixes together in battle phase. Because if your opponents have 5 damage, then this guy in tandem with Drill Dragon is probably more threatening than the Restand will be. So, fantastic card. Playing it as a 4-of. Then we have Dusty Plasma Dragon. So, during your turn, once per turn, when your opponent's rearguard gets bound, you can have him and the unit in the same column as him get plus 5,000. So it basically makes your column 10, and so you're swinging for 27, 30 if you have a Rising Phoenix with the 3k buff on it, which admittedly falls short of making some lines, but it's still enough to hit most Vanguards with 1 trigger applied to it. in both formats. So that is something. The problem is, though, with him is that he needs other cards to actually do things, and therefore is more or less a vanilla unless you can enable it. So I'm probably going to play this at 3. But good card, though. I like him. Hammer Knuckle Dragon is a Counterblast 2, so I'm not even going to consider it. And then we have Lightning of Hope Helena. So, once per turn, during your turn, when your opponent's rear guard gets bound and you have no face-up cards in your damage zone, you can Soul Blast 1 to countercharge 1. This is what I meant about how Dragonic Death Scythe being a Soul Blast 2 is a bit of an issue, because you've got this guy, which also uses Soul to countercharge. You're using things, you're going to be using Drill Dragon, who takes away from the Soul. If you're playing Excess Streak Dragon, that's also Soul. Ricky's also Soul. Like, you're seeing where the issue of the whole Soul management thing coming up. The other issue I have in Helena is you have to have no face-up damage to get the countercharge. That's just not very good. Because the reason I say that is, this deck doesn't go through all of its counterblasts in a turn. It goes through 1 or 2. Like, you can burn through it all, but that requires you to have multiple Axel circles so that you can just slam things like Reckless, Stinger, and have a drill. But otherwise, you're going through 1, maybe 2 in a turn. Like, this deck counterblasts about as frequently as Murakumo does, in my opinion. Maybe just a little bit more, but probably about the same as Neo Nectar does. So you're not going to really be getting this guy off that often. I might play it as a one-of if I have no other space, but like this isn't really that good of a countercharger. Then we have a Demolition Dragon, who on rearguard, if your opponent has no front row units, no front row rearguards, pardon me, he gets +3. So it's an 11k attacker or booster, as long as you can keep your opponent's front row clear. You know what? That's pretty decent. Secondly, when he is on Vanguard and his attack hits, you draw a card. So we have our first ride that does something going second. Okay. Furthermore, sure, your opponent can block this without a booster if they throw any crit or heal down, but if they're playing a deck that needs Counterblast for their turn 2 and onwards ride to make a play, looking particularly at Circle Magus, Berserk Dragon, Dandy Guy, Romario, and such forth, then not letting this hit denies them of making a play. So it's actually kind of a catch-20 there. Also, if you want to just force out more shield from the opponent, you could just stick a Demolition Dragon behind a Demolition Dragon and swing for the 19. Your opponent now has to throw more cards down to block it, which is less out of their hand to stop your actual rush. Otherwise, you hit and get a draw. So it's really no loss to you to throw a booster behind this that can hit for 11 or something like that. Yeah, pretty decent. And then we have Roaring Thunder Dominance Wyvern. You're not going to play this. So let's move on to some cards that were revealed via a poster. Dragon Dancer Regina has the ability to put herself into the soul, so a much needed way to build up soul, as long as your opponent has 1 or less rearguards in the front row, and to doing so, you get to give 3 of your units +5. This is actually pretty decent for hitting over certain numbers, and I might actually end up playing this in the final build of the deck. Depends on what our last common does. Then, if we move further down here, there is a grade 0. Yeah, there's Dragon Dancer Katharina, the front trigger like I figured it would be. There we are. So Electric Chase Draco Kid. So when he boosts and the attack hits, you can sack him to bind one of your opponent's front row rear guards. I don't see this being used in the standard deck because we already have Drill Dragon, but in the premium deck, this is, to my knowledge, the only card that allows you to trigger Rising Phoenix during a Vanquish of Voltage turn. Because you can slap this behind something like, say, Sigma, and if they... Oh god, this in Sigma on the Voltage turn actually does sound kind of dope, because if you have this boosting Sigma and they don't let it hit, Sigma restands. But if it does hit, then you get to pop a thing and call birds out, and then they're swinging for numbers on the Voltage turn as well. So you might want a copy or 2 of this for the premium deck. Who knows? Depends on how the premium deck wants to play out. And that's everything. So those are my thoughts on Narus coming out of the set. Overall, a really solid Wave 1 deck that's just unfortunately competing in the format where we're starting to get multiple Wave 2 decks. And there's also some other Wave 1 decks that are just really powerful at the time of this set being released. Looking particularly at Angel Feather, Murakumo, and Neo Nectar. And then we've got the revamped Royal Paladin and Oracle Think Tank. And Gold Paladin, all admittedly speaking, I don't think Golds are really going to be able to do anything different than they already have before, even with Raven-haired in there. We have a solid base to work off of, so the Wave 2 Naru deck, if it ever comes around, will be decently good. However, that implies that Narus are going to be in VBT 5, and I just don't know about that one. I'm hoping that they're going to be in there, because I want to see the return of Draconic Descendant V-Series, and the shenanigans that can happen with the premium deck in that regard. And because like if we get Draconic Descendant V-Series, then that means the old Superior Ride combo becomes a thing, and that means that we can potentially try and get first stride when our opponent's at grade 2. So that's just something to keep in the back of your minds. All in all, solid looking clan. It's not awful, but it's also just a little bit shy of being incredible, and I will pick it up, and I do believe that Tectonic's Drill Dragon here will have fantastic SVR foiling, and Draconic Death Scythe will also have really nice OR foiling. Unfortunately, it's just going to be that same shitty Shadowfoil triple rare foiling that we've had since set 1. So, comment down below what you guys think in regards to Narukami. Am I being too pessimistic, or do I at least have some grounds to believe some of the things I'm saying? Until next time, this is Boost39, jacking out.